shared that, look, why don't you take the outer limit of what it could be? It could be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, but why don't you build an outer limit, build a little bit of cushion, and then come to the consumer with an absolutely true story. But I still want to come back to that point, Vineet, that we are very unusual. Half of this problem happens because nowhere in the world does a consumer buy a property on paper. They buy a fully constructed property. Is it a demand-supply imbalance in the country which is making all of us rush to any project launch without even verifying the builder's credentials and go and book that flat? What's going on?
The way I would look at it, there are two angles to it. One, you have a section of consumers today which are primarily, what we call in our internal parlance as I-user. These are investor users, These guys are always scouting around for pre-launch deals. Because what happens in every project is you have three aspects to the project. You have approvals, you have liquidity, you need money to really execute, and the third is your infrastructure and wherewithal bandwidth to really execute the thing physically. Right? Now, if you look at all three individually, approvals is one, like Getambar said correctly, it's really not in the developer's control. You're dependent on an external agency.
And I totally agree. That is something that's a very big debate on how do we resolve that for the industries.
Yeah, that's like an industry debate with the government which will go on, right? The second is about liquidity. Liquidity also, if you look at what has happened is that, when you go book, consumers pay a very meager amount at that point of time. Now, the company might have liquidity or will look at banks. The banks don't fund real estate anymore. They're like so stringent about it.
That's now. Vineet, the data we have is 2007, 2009. The monies were coming in. It was really a case, as Samir pointed out, of overextension. Then why go ahead?
Was bad. No money was coming in. After 8 and 9, there was a total squeeze on liquidity for the real estate sector. Total. Banks were not lending. Risk weightages were increased tremendously.
Then shouldn't you be even more cautious about launching projects when you know that the money couldn't come in?
Yeah, but if you have an option where there are consumers offering, so the developer is also naturally going to fall into that, okay, there is funding which is coming. I don't need a heavy discount there. I would have paid interest. Let me give a basic discount here.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I have to play the devil's advocate here. I'm still coming back to those two big issues. But Kalpesh is there. Kalpesh, you come back to the country. Are we unusual? Do execution delays happen world over? Are we unusual in launching a project way too early, before all the permissions have been granted, before funding has been fully tied up? Is that the crux of the problem?
I think the problem is several-fold. The two big categories of issues are, the first is regulatory issues, and we've covered that adequately. I think the second issue that the developer community, all of us need to honestly look at and address is that, our organizations are not fully scaled up to handle the kind of work that we've taken on. In the last 5 years, most developers took on a lot more projects than they'd handled in 5 years prior to that. And the organizations didn't scale up, right? So to be able to deliver 5 to 10 million square feet, or to be working on 5 to 10 million square feet at a time, your business needs to run like a well-oiled manufacturing machine. You need to have product teams that are designing products based on input from the sales teams, which are being drawn from detailed market research, and then being fed into the construction team that works like a factory, like an assembly line, churning out product quickly that is being sold in a very methodical manner. And to achieve all of that, you need organizations with strong leaders, with strong managers, with skilled laborers, and these people need to have years of experience. And guess what? The Indian real estate sector does not have the experience in enough quantities. So all of us are struggling to scale up our organization. This is a multidimensional problem, right? If it was just the regulatory issues, things would have been, not this bad. If it was just the fact that, there's labor shortage, there's, management shortage in the business, things would not have been that bad. But you combine these issues, with the issue of liquidity, with the issue of the markets going up and down. Anytime you add more dimensions to a problem, things get overcomplicated, and I think that's what you're facing. The sector is still nascent, in my opinion, in its ability to handle this much workload, but things are fast changing. To answer your question about how real estate is sold outside of India versus in India, there are plenty of markets around the world where projects are sold, in a pre-launch manner, before construction has even started. markets vary in terms of what they require. You know, New York, for example, you have to have all your approvals in place. You have to have the, your
Right.
condo documents signed. It's a function of the market. There is no easy answer for India. All I know that is if we instituted something like that in India right now, the sector overall, and that includes the developers, that includes the financiers, and that includes the consumers, they would all suffer.
You're saying that the real estate industry needs a lot of growing up to do. It's not just one issue, regulatory issue, yes, but there are labor issues, there are cash flow issues, and clearly there are management issues within the real estate sector. That's a lot to talk about. I'm going to come back and actually look at each of these issues and say, how are we going to actually resolve them? Because the industry has to mature, as Kalpesh just pointed out, and we all suffer because of all these issues and execution delays. We'll be right back. We're actually looking at a very, very big issue that affects all of us, execution delays in residential construction across the country. On NDTV Profit. It is the property show. Every week we will be taking a big debate topic and thrashing it out with an eminent panel. Residential construction accounts for nearly 70% of the activity in the Indian real estate sector. And guess what? Approximately 45% of the total residential supply that was committed for completion by January 2012 is witnessing significant execution delays. And that's our topic of discussion. I'll reintroduce my panelists, Vineet Relia, CEO of SARE Group. I also have with me Getambar Anand, Vice President, CREDAI National. Samir Jasuja, Founder, CEO of PropEquity. Mumbai Studio, Kalpesh Mehta, Director, Rohan Lifescapes. And of course, Vinod Sampath, Advocate and Property Expert. Right before the break, we were talking about how regulatory issues are the first hurdle that builders have to cross. And that's, according to you, the big reason and not the liquidity crunch which is causing all the delays. I will come back to that question, Mr. Anand. Why would you not actually announce a project after you've got all your clearances?
You see, this industry is a very capital-intensive industry. And unfortunately, there is not much access to capital for this industry except mostly from the private equity sector, which is a very expensive proposal. As a compulsion, developers have no other choice but to look at sales, aggressively to raise capital. Had the banks been more, cooperative in lending to the sector under directions from the RBI, which is not so, then this problem would definitely not arise. And I say this because when you sell early, you sell cheap. If you sell on a finished product, you get much more revenue. So why would anybody sell early, it's out of compulsion. If you get capital at, say, at 12 to 13% from the bank, you can start your construction and you can start selling as you go along. And if the customer is comfortable with the track record of the developer, he can invest with the developer. So like I said, it is something which has driven the developers to do this. It's a lack of capital which has driven developers to do this.
So it brings me to the second question. Would you not then make an honest promise to the consumer, Vineet? Would it not help to be a lot more honest? Or would it not help to be far more realistic on your delivery dates?
See, again, it's directly
related. Is it competition which is driving everyone to say that I'm going to finish first?
I think it's a liquidity call at that point. Like, for example, our projects, the way we handle projects is we take over projects which are prior approved. So when we launch a project, we know it's going to be execution and our infrastructure, and we work like a manufacturing unit. So if we have delays in project, touch wood, we don't till date, but they're going to be more related to issues like labor, or there's a material issue on cement.